Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Hope you had a good morning so far. Um, well, I hope you enjoy this lesson. And there are a couple of ways you can enjoy it. One where you may rise from listening greatly strengthened, and the other way is by waking up greatly refreshed. So you make the choice how you want to do that. You know, I live here in Colorado in a major skiing area, as you would guess, and there's ski slopes everywhere, all over these mountains, famous ones, actually. And because of the mountains, these resorts spring up everywhere. And they're not only downhill, but there's also a country hill or country cross country skiing, in which they just go across a little bit rolling hills, maybe or flat anyway, and they just go distance. And so it's really an interesting time. And also they have sledding, of course, that's coming down off these mountains, where kids really enjoy that. And the snow lasts a little bit longer the higher you go in elevation, naturally, because it stays cooler there a little bit longer. And spring warmth starts a little bit later. So people really take advantage of it. It comes early and it stays late, this snow, and they enjoy it. And we moved from Germany, and we lived there for about 12 years. And in that time, my family and I, separately and as a family, is there when we had some of our greatest experiences and a few more disaster crashes too as well. And as we learned how to ski. And I was taught to ski and to care for my skis and all that goes with equipment. It's not just, skiing. It has to do with your equipment too. You have to do just the right things. I'll give you an example of one of these moments. In fact, it was the last time I skied to my memory. We were in Germany, of course, skiing in the mountains, and Karen and our two boys decided to go. Well, Karen, on this day, had already given up trying to ski, and she decided that she would best enjoy herself sitting by the fire with some hot chocolate and waiting for us to return as we told her our stories. And that was her job, if you will, at that point. Well, anyway, as we were coming down, the two boys were in front of me, and when I was making my last turn, they'd already been ahead of me and got to the T-bar to go back up the slope. And this was kind of the end of the day. And so as I came around, I was going just a little bit faster than they were because I'm more experienced. But as I made my left and then tried to do my right turn to go down to the T-bar where they were, my skis hit some ice underneath the snow that was, you couldn't see it if you tried. And when my skis going at that speed hit that ice, up my legs flew. I mean, I was doing cartwheels in the air. And I came down and just splattered all over that ice. And it hurt. And my legs went one way, arms went the other way, and skis went the third way. And I just laid out. And I knew that I had broken something or something was wrong because that hurt too bad. Well, in fact, it got so, I guess, disastrous looking that the other skiers there who were really experienced knew that I had probably hurt myself, and they come racing over there, all these Germans mostly, come racing over there to see how I was doing. And luckily, I didn't have any bones broken, but it did everything but that. So anyway, I picked myself up, and I put on my skis, and they saw I was okay, and they left. And I skied over slowly to where the boys were, and got on the T-bar with them and went up the slope again to call it a day. I didn't realize it truly was a day because by the time that night, when I got back to the hotel room, I was so sore. And I spent the rest of the evening soaking in the bathtub, just trying to relieve the pulls and the pain that came with my body. That was my disaster. And it didn't have anything to do with equipment. It had to do with just I guess, my prowess as a skier. But anyway, it was a time in which it has built a great memory in me. Our scripture lesson today talks about this to some degree, and it comes from the book of Genesis chapter 50 about taking care of our equipment. And it reads like this. When Joseph's brothers saw their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and will certainly pay us back for all the wrong we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, I beg you, forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now, please forgive the transgressions of the servants of the God of your father." And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face and said, "We are your servants." Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I not in the place of God? But as for you, you intended harm me, but God intended it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many lives. So now do not fear. I will provide you and your little ones. So be comforted." And so he did comfort them and spoke kindly to them. That's very interesting, is it not? In my files, I came across an article that talks about this cross-country skiing. And the newspapers speaks to our lesson today. It says, the title, "A Ski is Built to Glide." And it goes on and says, "The friction of the ski melts the snow enough to create a thin film of moisture. Without this film, the ski has trouble gliding. There are several situations, however, that prevent this film from forming. One, with which most cross-country skiers are familiar, occurs when one or both of the skis get wet while the skier crosses a stream. And as the water on the ski begins to freeze, it blots up patches of snow. These moist patches of snow, in turn, gather more snow until the resulting buildup makes the ski feel as though it's made of lead. The skier is reduced to laboriously plodding through the woods. Now, the experienced skier, however, immediately recognizes the reason for this trouble. He stops, takes off his skis, scrapes them thoroughly, puts them on, and flies down the trail once again. I found that article in 1981. Now, how often have we found ourselves mentally icing up during the course of the day? We're making good headway when suddenly something crops up. There's an argument with our spouse, or there's a problem with some finances, or there's a rude person on the phone, or there's something going on, one thing after the other. And then this can just make our attitude take a nosedive and even mounts up over the period of days and even weeks, when all of a sudden our lives are just iced over. And not long after, we're plodding through the day of task, wondering why we're feeling so weary and beat down all the time, why everything seems a chore, everything we do. We just felt it was a rotten day, and we can't pinpoint the why. Now, Joseph in the Old Testament lesson of today certainly didn't have a smooth slide through life, did he not? He was sold into slavery out of jealousy and envy by his own brothers, his family. He trusted them. His brothers did him wrong. Oh, it ruined his life, and it could, in a way, in a monumental way, and he could understandably have let their cruelties build up in his life to where he could have a very cold and icy and an unforgiving man within inside of himself, how he approached life. But none of that for Joseph. He maintained a frost-free, ice-free forgiveness that didn't allow his hurts to snowball and his spirit to freeze up. I wonder how he did that. Now put yourself in his place. Would you not want to do that yourself? It was something I probably would do. I would be resentful. I would have revenge in my heart. And there they were wanting forgiveness and wanting me to help them after what they did to me. It is human to place our hurts and put them in a bag and carry them through life. There's an old Hasidic tale of a man walking down the road laden with this heavy sack over his shoulder. And soon another man comes along driving a horse and a wagon. Now the man in the cart sees the man toiling under this heavy weight and offers him a ride. The man with the sack accepts with gratefulness the offer and climbs aboard the wagon. Well, a few minutes down the road, a little bit later, the driver turns around to see if the man is comfortable. And to his astonishment, the man is standing with the sack on his shoulder. The driver remarks to him, "The wagon is going to carry the sack anyway, so why don't just put it down, your load, and let the horse and wagon do all the work?" There's a truth behind all that. The Bible makes clear that this needless burden of negative views, of resentments, and anger that encumbers and impedes our progress, and worst of all, cools and freezes up our very soul. Another example of that I came across, I think it's really amusing, but it's very insightful, is about a college in Wisconsin who asked the U.S. government granting agency in Washington, D.C., for permission to destroy some dead files they had in their possession. After months of delay, an answer came giving permission to destroy the dead files. But then it said, "Permission granted, but be sure to keep one copy of everything." So much for getting rid of it, right? So holding grudges and resentments that are secret in our hearts, that are just like a cancer in our heart, disappointments about our life and the stresses of it, and the bitterness that we have about getting old, or having frailties, or our families not treating us well, or something, whatever it may be, against a life's unfairness, is a very subtle thing. It builds up in our life. It's easy to fool myself and think that I'm not angry with someone, when as a matter of fact, I really am down inside. I won't let it go. I keep holding that sack on my shoulder. You know, there actually is a training book in Army for leaders that shares a technique of how to bring two soldiers together who have quarreled. And it's really simple, actually. Just put both of them to wash the same window, one on the inside and one on the outside. And before long, looking constantly at each other, they find themselves starting to laugh, and the quarrel is forgotten. Now, you might want to try this with your spouse or your family member, or someone else that near you, or whatever it may be. It might work. It actually works in the Army. The story of Joseph is an incredible picture of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not something that comes easily or readily to many of us. There certainly isn't a whole lot of it floating around the world today. For example, have you ever gone to a store that had very pretty and delicate merchandise around? Well, that kind of store frowns at little children, and the employee's blood pressure goes up to 100 points if a 6-year-old come barreling into that store with all that delicate merchandise on the shelves there. And that kind of store usually has a sign on the door window thanking you for enjoying your food and drink before you enter. And all these other same stores have the same sign on the inside. And you know what that sign says? And you've seen it many, many times. If you break it, you pay for it. And that's what the whole world puts up today. That's the sign that human beings so often put up in the stores of their lives. I'm fragile. I'm delicate. I'm sensitive. I'm proud. I'm stubborn. I'm wounded. I'm hurt. And if you break part of me, you're going to pay for it. The sign of the world says, if you break it, you pay for it. So what does the sign in God's store say? An article I found, again, tells of a woman named Susan who tells how she tiptoed through a gift shop filled with hundreds of extremely delicate and fragile merchandise on glass shelves, make it even worse. Pausing to admire a one-of-a-kind sculpture of an English village, she strained to see as much detail as she could possibly do without touching it. Suddenly, a female voice nearby said, "Please, pick it up. Don't worry," she said with a smile. "You can rely on our store policy." And then she pointed to a sign on the display case, and it read this: If you break it, please tell us so we can forgive you. The woman nodded. Since we put up that sign, wow. And Susan said, I can't believe you did that. And the woman, teller there, said, it has changed things in our store. You know, breakage hasn't really changed. People do break things. But it's wonderful how much more comfortable everybody feels. In fact, it's made such a difference in my own attitude that I took one of the signs home and my kids love it. I guess it's human nature. There's something about knowing you'll be forgiven for a mistake that kind of frees you up to relax and enjoy. And that is the story of forgiveness and love of God. God has put a huge sign. It's Jesus on the cross. And that sign says unmistakably, if you break it, please tell me so I can forgive you. And that is why when Jesus teaches us how to pray, he includes asking for forgiveness for our sins as well extending forgiveness to other people around us. When we've broken God's laws and commandments, then we've shattered a relationship. When delicate feelings are damaged, when peace has cracked into divisiveness, when unity is split into discord, when families are fractured, when our faith is crumbling, that is the time to turn to God in prayer, asking for forgiveness. 1 John, first chapter 8 through 10 says this, a portion of it. It reminds us about human beings has a continual need for forgiveness. Quote, if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. We all need forgiveness. And that's what Christ is all about. So, when Jesus gives us the Lord's Prayer, there's only one request that is conditional in that. We are forgiven as we forgive. And why is that? It's simply by the very nature of the created order that we must give in order to receive. We can't receive nothing from God if our hands are clenched into fists or with our fingers pointed at someone else. St. Augustine said this, God gives where he finds empty hands. Now, Joseph certainly had reason to be very upset with his brothers based on what they did to him many years before. Yet he had matured and clearly not only forgiven them, but has been able to see how God has worked within him and what has happened to him to save many lives. Instead of getting even or judging or hurting them in return, he forgives them. One of my favorite authors, I'm sure you've read some of his work, is C.S. Lewis, in a work he did called Mere Christianity, and he said this quote that I found. Everyone says forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive. Well, that's a great insight. And then to mention the subject at all is to be greeted with anger. If we were to put ourselves in a place of Joseph, who was almost killed and then sold into slavery by his brothers, in the place of others, we hear about the news all the time, whose lives have been touched by horrific acts of violence and evil, or simply in our own situations, we might confess that we would find extending forgiveness excruciatingly difficult because we have that hurt and that pain. Richard Forrest, an author you might want to remember, had a book entitled Prayer, Finding the Heart's True Home. And there's a great deal of confusion about what forgiveness is and what it is not. And this is what he said in that book. Forgiveness does not mean that we will cease to hurt. The wounds are deep, and we may hurt for a very long time. Just because we experience emotional pain does not mean that we have failed to forgive. So to go through this process, what he's saying is a slow process many times. It takes time for a wound to heal up. It takes time to go through the pain of that healing process. So give yourself a break a little bit and just stick through it. There is a German pastor by the name of Helmut Thielen, who endured the darkest days of Nazi Germany, Third Reich. And he wrote this in his memoirs. One should never mention the words forgive and forget in the same breath. We remember, but in forgiving, we no longer use the memory against others. Forgiveness is not pretending that the offense did not really matter to us. It did matter. And it does matter. And there is no use pretending otherwise. The offense is real. But when we forgive, the offense no longer controls our behavior. So what then is forgiveness? It is a miracle of grace whereby the offense no longer separates us from God and from others. Forgiveness is man's deepest need and God's highest achievement. I can't encourage you enough to remember that. We see that with Joseph and his brothers, forgiveness is a miracle of grace whereby the offense no longer separates them from one another. Forgiveness means that we will no longer use the offense to drive a wedge between us, hurting and injuring one another. It means that we will not use the offense as a weapon against someone else. Forgiveness means that the power of love holds us together is greater than the power of the offense that separates us. That's very important. And that is forgiveness. In forgiveness, we're releasing our offenders so they no longer are bound to us. In a very real sense, we're freely giving ourselves and freeing ourselves to receive God's grace once we forgive and to release that burden in our lives. Years ago, when we lived in Pennsylvania, our trash was picked up on Tuesdays and Fridays. And some Fridays, the truck would come earlier than usual, and I didn't get the trash out there in time. Then I would look forward to Tuesday over the weekend because to get rid of a whole week's of garbage. None of us would intentionally think of letting our trash get crammed full and backed up when we knew that we can get rid of it. Can you imagine having smelly garbage piled up behind your house or in your garage or wherever, and when the sanitation truck pulled up in front deciding, I think I'll just keep it another week? That's ridiculous, right? Yet how many of us nurse and hold on to hurts, angers, grudges, and other things and disappointments in life that stink up our life and foul up our relationships, even though Jesus said to pray, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. We do with our memories, emotions, and relationships what we wouldn't do with dirty diapers and orange peels. We hang on to the garbage. Some of it is very painful and is piled up over the years. Nothing but the cleansing forgiveness and grace of Jesus can pull out that bitterness that has taken root in our souls. I can't envision many legacies more honorable than for those who knew us best to say, he or she was a forgiving person. She was the most forgiving person I ever met. And now many of us would want people to remember us by thinking, if not saying only, she really knew how to hurt and nurse that hurt. He really knew how to hold a grudge. We didn't want to hear that about us. God has put a huge sign. It is a Jesus on the cross. And that sign says, if you break it, please tell me so I can forgive you. The picture of Joseph and his brothers shows how beautiful forgiveness can be. Matthew 18:21 says, to let the spirit of forgiveness transform my dragons into angels. You know, it's so much easier to forgive an enemy than a friend. It really is. George Herbert, an author, said this, he who cannot forgive others destroy the bridge over which he himself must pass. Now let's talk about the ice of forgiving ourselves. We haven't touched on that very much at this point. We have all had moments in the past that we remember that we have failed ourselves and others who depended on us. And we're hardest on ourselves if we're honest with us. A reminder late at night as we think about our past, or we see a picture, or a reflecting moment when we feel that scar is still there and we remember that hurt and that pain and we feel shame. I have a memory. I know you do too. Well, let me share mine just briefly. It's kind of like a memory combined by a bunch of them into one. I reflect on how many times I was not there for my family due to my Army service. When my son broke his arm on a skateboard, I was in training in Washington, D.C. When I sat in the desert of Saudi Arabia at war, when they once again celebrated Christmas and my family without me. When my wife struggled to fill my place in a family, when once again I was gone for a long time. Birthdays, anniversaries, soccer games, Easter egg hunts, Christmases, church children's programs, and just being there to throw the ball with the boys. I was not there. One day I was talking with my wife and I shared a deep guilt that I was thinking about all these missed times when I could have been a better husband or a better father. She then gave me a hug and said this to me that was so important, that she said that she was proud of me as well as the boys were of me. Yes, it was hard, but she signed up for it as I did, and she had no regrets. I felt so much weight come off of my shoulders, and those memories have not gone away. Of what I missed, you bet I remember those things. But I reached deep inside of myself and came to a peace, forgiving myself for all my failures, and making today and tomorrow count even more to try to make up for all that. You know, one of the most therapeutic aspects of mature faith is this doctrine of forgiveness. It is not God's will that we be humiliated by remorse over a deed done or a word said. It's not the intent. Shame serves no lasting purpose. God is not some sadist enjoying the mental agony of his children, nor should we take that role here on earth among our family and our friends. God's name is love. He is the one with the offender, and he understands circumstances of the offense and forgives when called upon and requested to do so. We are not wiser than God, nor should we be more demanding than he is. If he is going to wipe the slate clean and give us a fresh start, we must be willing to accept ourselves, live with the past, and learn from its scars, and move into a future with strength and determination to make our lives better. Forgive yourself, even as God has forgiven you, and get rid of that ice that holds you down and holds you back from going forward easily that God intended. What we need are Teflon-coated memories, which no residue sticks, and where wounds are soon at least forgotten and not affecting our forward movement. Let's talk now about the ice of forgiving others that I mentioned earlier. Let's go one more step in it. There's a story of a man who's wearing a heavy coat on a warm day. When asked by a friend why, he said this: because it feels so good when I take it off. Are we waiting around in discomfort before we forgive someone wrong? We are weighing a heavy burden by bragging around these past grievances. God invites this very hour to drop that heavy burden. Now, most of us have enough to do in life without carrying around a heavy mantle of bad feelings and angers and disappointments and possibly even revenge. That poison is destroying us and taking away our joy, our happiness, and our peace. These are forms of self-punishment that can be let go as deceptions, even though we think they're justified. Our strength and courage is sapped for the adventurous and accomplished living. We are cranky, we're hard to please, we're resentful, all because we carry guilt about ourselves and about others. My mother told me about her children who were fussing and fighting all day long while it rained outside. There was a terrific thunderstorm about 2 a.m. in the morning, and the mother went to check on the children. She heard an unusual noise upstairs, and she went to check. When she asked where they were, a little voice said, "We are all in the closet forgiving each other." Freedom to be happy once again through forgiveness has a warmth to it. It has a de-icing effect. We need to do it if we're going to glide gracefully through life. So let's talk one more step before we come to conclusion here. The ice of life's disappointments. I mentioned this earlier. There's an amusing story about Chippy, the parakeet, who's the true story, by the way, that came out in a newspaper, and he never saw it coming. Well, one second, Chippy was peacefully perched in his cage. The next, he was sucked in, washed up, and blown over. How did that happen? Well, it all began when Chippy's owner decided to clean Chippy's cage with a vacuum cleaner. She removed the attachment from the end of the hose and stuck it in the cage. Well, about that time, the phone rang, and she turned to pick it up. Well, she'd barely said hello when Chippy was sucked right into the vacuum cleaner. The bird's owner gasped, put down the phone, turned off the vacuum, and opened up the bag, and there was Chippy, still alive but stunned. And since the bird was covered in dust and soot, she grabbed him and raced to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and held Chippy under the running water. Then, realizing that Chippy was soaking wet and shivering, she did what any compassionate bird owner would do. She reached for the hairdryer and blasted the pit with hot air. Poor Chippy never knew what hit him. A few days after this great trauma, a reporter heard about it, came around and talked to her, and she had asked about it and wanted to see how the bird was doing. "Well," said the owner, "Chippy doesn't sing much anymore. He just sits and stares." I think that's a funny story. It's hard not to see why. Sucked in, washed up, and blown over. That's enough to steal a song from any heart. This last spring brought a mother bird to create her nest in our porch light outside. And we left her to do her laying and protecting her eggs. But when we used the front door, we had to go through the front door occasionally. She would be startled, and she would quickly fly to a nearby tree, fussing at us. Well, she soon got tired of her nest position, and one day left the nest to create a new one where it was a bit more quieter and less vulnerable. Our lives are just like that. We'll put our confidence into other people, into ourselves, and life itself, our finances, to find that it's just full of imperfection and disappointments. People hurt us. We hurt ourselves. And we put false confidence into life that comes up too short in our lives and our expectations. And when God is wanting us to learn is that we can build our nest near Him where we know there is perfect love, forgiveness, and acceptance. Let me conclude with this. One day, I went into my computer filing system to find the file on love. I discovered I didn't have one. I was astonished by that. It must be misfiled, I thought. So I searched among faith and fulfillment, between healing and heaven. Perhaps it was sandwiched somehow accidentally between Christ and Christian education. After all, these have to do with love, don't they? But it wasn't there, nor was it even near money or mercy. When I stopped to reflect on it, something occurred to me. The love file was scattered, not misfired. Parts of it were found in patience and kindness, and mercy and humility and trust. And therein loyalty and perseverance, all were part of love. But where I found most of the information about love was deeply seated in the forgiveness by God of others and oneself. That's where I found most of the information. Well, let me close, and let me pray this prayer for all of us as we reflect on the forgiveness of God. Let us pray. Forgiving God, thank you for loving us, even when we are unlovable, and for your patience when we are tiresome, blind, hypocritical and prideful. Thank you for your tender discipline that longs to heal us from the painful disease called sin. Help us to see our own need and not focus on the sins of others. Remind us to remove the plank in our own eye before we go looking for a speck in someone else's. Please continue to inspire us to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling, and may we confess our sins to you and receive your life-changing forgiveness and love offered to us through Jesus, your Son. Amen. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. So every time you think about Joseph, think about what he could have done and what he did. And that's a lesson for all of us. Don't hold back. Seek that forgiveness. Give that forgiveness. And be part of the grace of God. God bless you.